You might have seen the drama in the House of Commons last night. Boris Johnson has been stripped of his special access to Parliament after MPs endorsed the Privilege Committee report that he lied about parties in Downing Street during the pandemic. MPs voted by 354 to 7 to back the report's findings. A total of 118 Conservatives voted, while 225 abstained. Peter Cardwell, our political editor, is with us. Could you have written that result beforehand, Peter? Is that more or less what you were expecting?
Pretty much. I counted only 7 MPs who were on the record actually saying this shouldn't go through, and 2 of them weren't even there. Nadine Dorries wasn't voting. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who spoke in the debate a number of times, interrupted Harriet Harman, interrupted Theresa May. He was someone who was very critical of this, but actually, believe it or not, Ian McKellen, Gandalf himself, was actually in the House of Commons spectating at the time. He later went for a cup of tea with Sir Keir Starmer, but even Gandalf himself could not say, "This shall not pass," and it went through 3-5-4.
Gandalf was, there
7.
is a moment, only in Boris Johnson's Inquisition, could you have Gandalf...
The soap opera continues.
Overseeing from the... it'll be that gallery in the middle, I would guess.
Yeah, he was on Coronation Street with old Sir Ian at one stage. So, yes, the soap opera continues. But I think the biggest and probably most interesting speech, Jacob Rees-Mogg spoke in great defence of Boris Johnson, but Harriet Harman, who was the chairwoman of the Privileges Committee, she's someone who gave a very impassioned speech, but perhaps the person who stuck the knife in most was the former Prime Minister Theresa May, who was, of course, Boris Johnson's predecessor. She was taken down by him, and yesterday she took the opportunity to take him down. Let's take a look.
And I also say to members of my own party that it is doubly important for us to show that we are prepared to act when one of our own, however senior, is found wanting. I will vote in favour of the report of the Privileges Committee. I urge all members of this House to do so, to uphold standards in public life, to show that we all recognise the responsibility we have to the people we serve, and to help to restore faith in our parliamentary democracy.
Yes, and hit the wall. Theresa May.
Sorry, this is a very largely visual point, whose glasses appeared to be in a different postcode from the rest of them. What's going on there?
Well, the thing that a lot of people noticed as well was that she seemed to be wearing the same necklace as Harriet Harman, or a very similar version of this sort of woven necklace.
Oh, I heard it was passed around.
So was it? Right,
I heard there was only one necklace.
When's your turn?
At one point, Jacob Rees-Mogg was wearing it.
Was he?
It was even more interesting.
Lindsay Hall gets it next.
It's like getting the conch, you know. It's like, here's the necklace, speak!
It is a bit Lord of the Flies,
That's
actually.
Yes, indeed.
Who's Piggy?
Exactly.
That's
Who's Piggy? Certainly in the middle. In terms of those that didn't vote, I'm intrigued by this. So, Jacob Rees-Mogg, as you say, spoke in the debate. He had a bit of a to and fro with Harriet Harman. You would think he'd be first out the traps to vote to back Boris Johnson. Why would he not do that?
Well, Boris Johnson actually said to his supporters quietly, he said, look, we're going to lose this. Let's make it so small as to be insignificant. It's not as if there are 6 parliamentarians who agree with Boris Johnson. There are many, many more. There are lots of people who abstained in this, either for their own reasons, to say to their associations, the people who pay their £25 a year to be a Conservative Party member, the people who give out the leaflets and knock the doors, who maybe, like Boris Johnson, a lot of MPs perhaps didn't want to vote against him. Big question as well, where is Rishi Sunak? He was someone who yesterday said this is a matter for Parliament, it's not a matter for him as head of government. But at the same time, he had talked a lot about integrity, about the nature, about supporting the Privileges Committee. He didn't vote, and nor did many of his ministers. So that's a very interesting one as well. And Penny Mordaunt, who was the leader of the House of Commons, who was answering for the government yesterday, no other ministers on the bench, just her.
She voted.
She did. She voted for the motion, yes.
Now, that bit is interesting for a couple of reasons. By the way, Boris instructing his, stand down troops, it's a great way of kind of covering your backside a bit.
It takes the poison out of it a little bit.
It's actually, the reason why I didn't get more support is because I told people not to support me.
And actually, if you look at it as well, a lot of this has worked very well for Boris Johnson. Not all of it. Obviously, he's been censured. It's a damning report. There's not taking anything away from that. But in terms of resigning before it came out, that takes away the suspension. That takes away the possibility of a by-election. That takes away him being in Parliament. And the humiliation
to a degree. Because, he was clearly never physically going to be there, even if he was still in there. But the idea that he would then be given his fate and then he would have to hand it down. all of that was kind of got. So he took the sting out of it.
He slightly went on his own terms, I think, and that's important for him. And that the vote sort of comes into that as well. There will have been a lot of people who will have disagreed with the severity of it in terms of the 90-day suspension. I mean, Margaret Ferrier, for example, the former SNP MP, now an independent, she knew she had COVID, got on the train and went to Glasgow. She was given a community service order for doing so. There's a possible what's called a recall petition in her constituency. If 10% of people vote for that, there will be a by-election. She will automatically lose her seat. She was given a 30-day suspension. Boris Johnson was given 3 times that.
But he's the Prime Minister.
That's right.
He was the Prime Minister. He was making the rules. She was a backbencher nobody had ever heard of.
And that's part of it, exactly. And the severity was also because he was found to be in contempt of the committee, even after they had given him their draft report.
Even Boris supporters. Mike Graham was talking to, was it James Sutherland before the news? Have I got that right? I think it was.
James Sutherland is certainly a Boris supporter,
Yeah, and he's, this is about, it's not about Boris, it's about the integrity of Parliament. This is about upholding the system. And and many of them said it. I think Harman, hate to agree with her, but others, Tory side as well, made the point that this is all we have, We have to protect this place, and if you are seen to lie and you haven't been honest with it, then there has to be a penalty.
And a lot of people who've got in touch, I'm sure, with us both, Ian, saying, well, why would you, parliamentarians, MPs lie all the time, all the rest of it. But the principle is there, whether you think people lie or not, the principle is there that you tell Parliament the truth. And actually, if you get it wrong, there's a lot of stuff not so publicised, not out there very much, of parliamentarians, MPs, members of the House of Lords coming back and saying, do you know what, I actually got this fact wrong, or I got this wrong, or I got that wrong. I'd like to correct the record. That doesn't often go on television. You don't hear very much about that, but it does happen fairly often, because guess what? People make mistakes. I make mistakes. I'm sure you don't make any mistakes. None whatsoever. But parliamentarians sometimes do. But in terms of what the Privileges Committee found, they found that even when correcting the record, Boris Johnson was telling lies. That's what they think.
Pete says, the irony of May's speech about respecting democracy after her attempt to stop Brexit, says Pete. I think that would be unfair. I don't think she tried to stop Brexit.
I think she tried to make Brexit happen, really.
Boris Johnson came back with the same deal as Theresa May's, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it wasn't perhaps the Brexit everybody wanted, but, I mean, she certainly tried to get...
Well, she was left with it,
She put the withdrawal agreement to Parliament a number of times. It wasn't what people wanted necessarily, but she did try.
Well, if you look at those around her and the advisors around her, I mean, they were hardly Remainers at that time. So,
that's right, plenty of Leavers,
fair to say.
Yeah.
Rishi Sunak, one of the reasons he didn't vote, of course, is because he was meeting a foreign leader.
Yes, Prime Minister of Sweden. I mean, that was fairly conveniently timed.
Do you think they talked about lockdowns?
Well, interestingly, and COVID inquiries as well, because Sweden's COVID inquiry is over now. And I think
it was done in February 22, wasn't it?
I think it actually started, I think some of the hearings, if I remember this correctly, were actually done by Zoom because they were still dealing with COVID at the time and they didn't want people in certain...
But ours is going to take 3 years.
At least 3 years. But actually, Baroness Heather Hallett is actually going to produce sort of interim reports at various points. So it's not going to kind of wait till the end to put the whole thing out. But we know we've heard from David Cameron yesterday. I know we're going to hear from George Osborne as well. So there's a lot that, in terms of the preparedness that has been put forward in that report, and that's the first what they call module of that, saying were we prepared for COVID? Most people think we weren't.
Just very briefly, Peter, urgent warning for homeowners as mortgage rates hit 6%. Rishi refuses calls for government help.
This is really grim.
Dems, I suppose.
This is really grim. You're looking at a fixed rate mortgage. The average fixed rate mortgage for 2 years, the rate is now 6.01%.
Yep.
So this is above the base rate. So this is seriously bad for homeowners. People who got a mortgage thinking hopefully things will be okay, keep the mortgage rate low. But on Thursday, we're going to see the Bank of England under a lot of pressure, not to raise rates, but also under further pressure to say, well, actually, we've got to keep inflation under control. Could be the 13th consecutive rise in interest rates, and that is misery for anybody. Any debt, not just mortgages, but credit card debt, personal loans, all the rest of it.
Well, if you had a 1% fixed rate and then it's suddenly 7%, 6-7%, then you are in a pickle. However, I mean, in the grander scale of the last 50 years, many people still say, well, you know, this is 6%. It's not 16%.
But at the same time, the mortgages were a lot smaller in the 70s and 80s, and 6% of a much smaller mortgage. House prices were a lot lower as well. A lot of people really, really stretched themselves, especially people who've bought in the last 20 years. And we've been used to low mortgage rates and low interest rates for a very, very long time, and that's just not going to be the case, at least for the short term.
Yeah, indeed, Peter. Thank you. Peter Cardwell, our political editor, with us on the programme. It's Talk TV, 18 minutes after 2.